Hello everybody and welcome to our latest HubSpot training webinar. I'm Matt and I'm joined by my colleague Jess Gamble today, who is a account director at the B2B Marketing Lab. Jess basically works with a lot of our client teams and heads up our client teams and works a lot within the HubSpot tool, looking at things like content strategy, how to
personas that we covered not so long ago.
But obviously today we're here to talk about how to build a lead nurture workflow and pathway in HubSpot. Something that you have good experience in doing. Jess is going to run through, I guess, all of the steps that you need to do before you actually start building anything in HubSpot. And then we'll actually dive into the tool, have a look at actually how to build a workflow within HubSpot. We'll have some key takeaways.
That we will.
And I think that's about it, right?
Yep.
Cool. Okay. Well, let's jump in. Let me make you the presenter, Jess.
Thank you. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see my screen. So today, as Matt mentioned, we're going to talk about how to build lead nurture pathways in HubSpot. But first, it's important to talk about what is a lead nurture pathway. So we've got a really great definition from HubSpot here. Lead nurturing is the purposeful process of engaging a defined target group by providing relevant information at each stage of the buyer's journey, positioning your company as the best and safest choice to enable them to achieve their objectives.
Now, Jess, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah. So basically, what you are doing in lead nurturing is you are giving your personas the content they need when they need it in order to push them further down the funnel and help them with their decision making. That is what that means.
That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. Yeah, the first time I read this definition, I was like, wow, it doesn't really roll off the tongue. But yeah. So often, I think in marketing, you have to argue why you want to do certain things and spend money on things and spend time on things. And so we wanted to just make sure that we were telling everyone why lead nurturing is so important. So there are a bunch of stats here on the screen. I think the most important one is that effective lead nurturing generates 50% more sales-ready leads at a 33% lower cost. So why is that so important? Well, that's important for your marketing team because they're going to generate 50% more leads. That's huge. It's important for your sales team because the leads that they are getting are closer to making a decision. They're more sales-ready. They're more qualified. And it's important for your business as a whole because you're generating those leads at a 33% lower cost. So, if we talk about how to create effective lead nurture pathways, there are 6 steps that we're going to go through today. First, we're going to define your buyer personas. Then you've got to identify your progressive profiling questions. Then you have to create new content or identify your relevant existing content. You have to establish your goals, then implement your workflow, and lastly, test, measure, and optimize.
And Jess, you're just going to take us through each of them before we dive into HubSpot, right?
Yes, I'm going to go through each one in a bit more detail, and then we're going to go into the tool, and I'm going to show you how you can set that up. So, your first step, defining your buyer personas. Of course, you need to know who your personas are in order to be able to give them the content they need that'll resonate with them. So if you know that your persona is Marketing Mary, a very typical example, you need to know what her pain points are so that the content that you're giving her in your lead nurture pathway addresses those pain points, helps her, educates her, and pushes her further down the funnel. So we've already spoken about buyer personas in quite a bit of detail over the last few webinars, so I don't think we're going to go into it much further here. But if you do have any questions or need any help creating your buyer personas, just get in touch. We can help you out.
There is a link. If you go to the webinar series page, you can access all of the old webinars as well. So you can view the previous webinar that Jess did on buyer personas specifically.
They're my favorite. Anyway, so that's step 1. So step 2 is identifying your progressive profiling questions. So let's take one step back. What are your progressive profiling questions? So every time someone comes to your website and fills in a form and converts to download something, you are asking them questions in your form in order to get information from them so that you know who they are, so that you can profile them. So it's important before you do your lead nurture pathways to identify the questions that you need the answers to in order to make your pathways more effective. So for example, if you know that you have different content based on different regions, let's say, so you have a whole bunch of content for the US, a whole bunch of content for the UK, and a whole bunch of content for Asia Pac, then you want to know before someone enters these lead nurture workflows. So ideally, a progressive profiling question in your form, you want to know which region they're in. So when you're setting up your lead nurture pathway, you're making sure that they're getting the right content for them. And this can be any kind of question. This can be, what is your biggest pain point? How many employees work for your company? As I mentioned, what region are you in? So anything that you need to be able to personalize the messaging, which will therefore mean that your content is more relevant, people are more likely to go down the funnel, and therefore you're increasing the quality of leads that you can pass on to your sales team. So, step 3. So I think every time when you say like create new content, people are like, oh my goodness, I have to now create all of this content for my new lead nurture pathways. But if you watched, I think our last webinar, which was 2 weeks ago, we spoke about the content matrix and the content audit. So once you've gone through these 2 exercises, you have a really good idea of all the content that you already have, which persona it maps to, and which buyer journey stage it's relevant for. So it means that even if you can't now go and create new content, you can use your existing content in your lead nurture workflows. The content audit would also have made it really easy for you to identify the gaps that you have in your content. So maybe you can start your lead nurture pathway and fill in with new content as you go.
And I think that's a very useful point, Jess, because if the content audit and matrix thing is relevant for this, but it's also relevant for lots of other things. So if you do a content audit and you actually you work out that you've got 3 personas, but actually all of your content is focused on persona 1 and you're not speaking to the other 2, it actually can help you aid your content strategy and the content you create moving forward, right?
100%. And what's really nice, and I think sometimes people forget, is they go, great, from my content audit, I can see I have a top, middle, and bottom of the funnel piece of content for persona 1, but I've got nothing for persona 2 or 3. So I'm going to go and create all my other content and then start my lead nurture pathway, which I think, like, if whatever you've got, like, start where you are.
Yeah, you can't wait until it's perfect, right?
You can't wait because it'll never be perfect. Yeah. I think what's also important is, depending on the amount of content that you have, and I guess we'll get here a little bit later on in the webinar too, you might find that if you are creating lead nurture pathways for persona 1, your lead nurture pathway might just have 1 piece of content for the top of funnel, 1 piece of content for middle, and 1 piece of content for bottom of funnel. If you've got a longer sales cycle or you have a whole lot more content, you then might be able to create a lead nurture pathway for the top of funnel. And then when someone does all the activities that you've identified in that lead nurture pathway, they've downloaded all the pieces of content, they then graduate to the middle of funnel lead nurture pathway. So I think it's important to know how much content you have so you can start where you are and build on from there.
Sure.
Okay, step 4, establish your goals. So I think there are 2 parts to this. There is obviously the first part where you need to make sure that everything that you're doing, you've got SMART goals. So what are you trying to achieve? And whatever you're trying to achieve, this will really guide you with the creation of your lead nurture pathways. So do you want people to be able to pass through this workflow and at the end request a demo of your software? Is that your end goal here? Do you want people to request to be contacted by your sales team? Or actually, do you want people to download a free trial of something? So it's important that you know what your end goal is. And it's also important to, throughout your workflow, give your contacts the opportunity to pass ahead to your end goal. So for example, if your end goal is to request a demo, you might find that in some of your early emails in the workflow, you're including a CTA to request a demo. Because if someone is ready to progress to the end of that workflow, you shouldn't make them go through the whole workflow before they do it.
Yeah. And just quickly, so when we talk about goals, there's two separate things here, because there's a goal as in you're building this workflow with, your goal is to try and generate more MQLs, for example, but goal is actually a term within the HubSpot tool as well in terms of workflows, right?
Yes. So in your workflow, and when we jump into HubSpot, I'll be able to show everyone, there is a goal that you set up with your workflow. And I think it's probably the thing that I see the most when I go into clients or potential clients portal. This goal part of the workflow is not used. So basically, the goal is that it's you set up your enrollment criteria, which we'll show. But the goal would be goal is person has filled out the form on request a demo page. So why that's important is as soon as someone reaches the goal, they're removed from the workflow, which then is really nice because you don't have to create another step to make sure that if they've done what you want them to do, they're not still getting the emails encouraging them to request a demo. But it's also nice because it means that you can quickly have a look at your workflow and see how it's performing. So then you can quickly go into HubSpot and be like, oh, great, 25% of my contacts have reached goal. That's amazing.
Well, I guess an easy example is if you set up a goal for X has become a customer, you obviously don't, the content you want to send a customer is very different to the content you want to send like an MQL. So you don't want to try and get customers to download ebooks on what your product can do when they've already become a customer, right?
Yeah, very important.
Cool.
There are some other ways in the tool that you can exclude people from your workflow, and we'll go through that. There's suppression lists, there's settings that you can make sure that if someone enrolls in this workflow, you enroll them out of everything else, but we'll go through that.
Cool.
So the next step is to actually implement your workflow. So we'll jump into HubSpot in a second, and I'll go through some of the steps and best practices that we use. But basically, your buyer personas, you've decided on the information you need, you've identified your content, you got your goals, you're ready to go. And
so I feel like I say this a lot on these HubSpot training webinars, but the key with this is that quite a lot of the work is done before you do anything in HubSpot, right? So when it comes to personas, when it comes to workflows, when it comes to lead nurtures, there's a lot of planning to do outside of HubSpot. So almost if you're looking to get started with this, you probably want to start thinking about it even maybe 2 or 3 weeks before you even build anything as such.
Definitely. So you've got to have your idea and your strategy before you're going to build it out. Often when we're doing this for clients, we will draw it up on a whiteboard so that you can draw out the if-then branches, the delays, and you can really think about your goals and your enrollment criteria so that you make sure that the right people are enrolling in your workflow, they're getting the right content, and you've set everything up perfectly. And that brings me beautifully onto step 6. You've got to test, measure, and optimize your workflow. So before even setting it live, you can test it and you can run a test contact through your workflow. Once it's live, you're going to measure and optimize it. And this is a continuous thing. You don't want to set up 5 different lead nurture pathways and then leave them to run for 2 years and come back and be like, oh, how did that perform? Again, if you set up your goal correctly, you'll be able to see how many people get to your goal of the workflow. You're also able to see the open rates of different emails, what content is being received well. And I think what's important there is if you can see that you sent an HTML email in one of the steps of your lead nurture pathway and it's had a really low open rate, maybe you need to swap out the next one to a plain text email and see how that works. So yeah, those are the 6 steps.
So should we jump into HubSpot?
I think we should jump into HubSpot. So I have got workflows open over here. So you can see I am going to create a persona-based workflow. So I've set up my enrollment criteria as persona is equal to business owner Barry. So the first thing I want to do is I want to deliver a top of funnel ebook. I want to make sure that this person download this ebook. But what I really need to do here is make sure that Barry hasn't downloaded this ebook before in the past. So the first thing I'm going to do is create an if-then branch, and I'm going to do it on form submission. because I want to make sure that Barry hasn't filled out this form and got this ebook before. So I'm going to choose the 5 tips form, and I'm going to do it on any page, because to me, we might have this form on various different pages, and I want to make sure Barry has never received this ebook. So, save. So, I've got Barry. So, if he's filled out the form, if it's no, so if he hasn't filled out the form, this is great, because then I want to send him an email, and let's see, I'm going to send him this one, email 1, and let's just pretend for the sake of our exercise that that email is promoting our 5 tips to make your website load faster. If yes, if Barry has filled out this form and already received this piece of content, I don't want to send it to him again. So I'm going to rather send him an email about something maybe a bit further down the funnel. So I'd want to send him an email promoting a middle of funnel offer. So let's see if I can find lead nurture. Let's go this. Oops, don't mind me. So now I'm sending him a different email which promotes a different piece of content, because I know that he's already done my top of funnel one. I want to push him a little bit further down the funnel. What's important here is just because you sent one email and they have, let's say they haven't opened this email, it doesn't mean that you now then have to push the middle of funnel offer to this person. If they haven't opened the mail, you can create another if then branch saying, if they haven't opened the mail, send them email 2, which is very similar email, but maybe with a different subject line, with slightly different content, maybe like a don't miss out, that kind of thing. So yeah, and then you can go off and do a whole bunch of different things. Instead of sending an email, you might want to say, once we've gotten to a really bottom of funnel piece of content that they've downloaded, actually the next step here is that you want to send them a mail just with a requested demo link, or just like these are the benefits of our demo. So
there's 2. I'm just looking at this screen, and hearing you explain the different I guess scenarios that you build a lead nurture. This could get quite messy quite quickly in terms of how wide this workflow and how many if branches and that sort of thing. So I guess there's 2 scenarios here. First one, if you don't have that much content, obviously you can do things like try and build into one workflow, trying to take someone from top of the funnel to middle of the funnel to bottom of the funnel. What would you recommend if you had loads of content without building like the world's greatest and biggest workflow?
So I have seen some incredibly complex workflows set up in HubSpot, to the point that you really have to like shrink your screen like to the side in order, my screen, there we go. I was like, it doesn't shrink on the screen. To the point where you have to shrink your screen like this to be able to see like half of the workflow. Yeah. And I mean, that works for some people and that's great. Personally, I find that really overwhelming and confusing. It also means that you only have one goal for this whole complex workflow. Yeah. So I like to say, if you don't have that much content and you're looking at like, 5 to 10 steps in your workflow, all in one workflow, great. I do find that if you've got a lot of content, you might want to split up your workflows into a top of the funnel workflow, a middle of the funnel workflow, a bottom of the funnel workflow. It also just makes reporting a bit easier because you're able to see which bits of the workflow are performing better. Yeah,
and just so I'm clear, you can, if you were to set it up so that you had 3 different workflows, so top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, you can use the goal criteria. So if somebody completes the goal of workflow 1, which is top of the funnel, you can then automatically enroll them on the next workflow, right? So they jump between workflows.
I've seen it done a couple of different ways. So you make sure that you've set your goal, which we'll go through now, and therefore they leave this workflow. You can also have the last step of this workflow to be that you enroll them in another workflow. So there are quite a few different ways to do it. You've just got to make sure that you have, I guess this is why we like to whiteboard it before we set it up. You've got to make sure that you've thought of all of the options to make sure that someone doesn't go through your workflow twice, 2 different workflows at the same time. Because I think what's important is obviously you want to send your persona great content, and that's amazing. But if you're going to send them like 2 emails exactly the same, promoting the same piece of content, you're probably going to do a bit more damage than good. So, I think we can go through some of the settings and the goals now that we're here in the tool. So to set your goal, you just click up here, set goal, and you'll see it's exactly the same as the way you set your enrollment criteria. So we can say, I want my goal to be that someone has filled in the contact us form on any page. That's all. And you can set a whole bunch of things. So it can be whatever you like.
It could be demos, free trials.
Yeah. So here you can always edit your goal if you'd like to change it later. So then if we go to settings, this is where you want to say how many days of the week do you want your mail to go out. If you're a B2B business, like we are, like most of our clients are, I generally say business days only. But I mean, people do check their email all the time, so I don't think it's too important. What times of the day do you want these actions to execute? I also think that's quite important. You want it to be at a reasonable time, so you can set between the hours of 9 and 10. You can set 7 a.m. and 10 p.m., whatever works for you. And this is just where you can choose your campaign in terms of reporting. What we were talking about earlier, about how to make sure that your person's only in one workflow, this is the unenrollment and suppression settings. So here you've got when a contact enrolls in this workflow, do not remove them from other workflows, or you can remove them from all other workflows, or you can remove them from specific workflows. What's important is you have to think about how your workflows work together. So if you have 3 different ones, let's say that your contact is in the bottom of funnel workflow right now, but they actually are just randomly interested in the top of funnel piece of content. So they download that, which is the enrollment criteria for a top of funnel workflow. You do not then want to have the setting going, remove them from all workflows, because you'll remove them from their bottom of funnel workflow, which is actually where they are, to the top of the funnel workflow, and then have to push them all the way down the funnel again. So again, just important to think about what you're trying to achieve, your goals and enrollment.
And this is where planning is key. So work all this out before you even go into this tool.
Exactly.
Right? Cool.
And I think just almost like test your own thinking with things like that. Like, oh, what if someone does this enrollment criteria? What's going to happen? How do we stop that?
And just in terms of, so we're obviously talking about sending emails.
Yes.
Now there's, in terms of the actual tool itself, there's some, in terms of how long you leave between each email and that sort of thing, there's some quite specific tools that you can use within the workflow tool, right? Do you want to just go through those?
Yeah. So in between steps, so let's say we've sent the contact this email. You can add a delay. So you can say, I actually only want to send them do this next action in 7 days and however many hours, however many minutes. So you can be really specific. I think this is important to think about who your persona is. How busy are they? Are you going to send them a mail, and then if they don't do anything within a day, send them another mail? Are you going to give them a week or two? Like, what are the kind of things that you want to do here? So you can add a delay and then send them the next email. And I mean, since we're talking about the workflow tool, there are so many other things that you can do. You can create a deal, create tickets, set contact properties, but we're not going to go into too much detail about those things. Yeah, so here is also where you can test your workflow. So you can put in a test contact to enroll, and you can see how that works, which is really nice, and I totally recommend everyone does that. And then in terms of performance, you can see how many contacts enrolled, how many contacts are currently in the workflow, and here you'll see your goal conversion rate because we've set up your goal.
Fab.
Yeah, so that is the tool.
Cool. If there's anyone on the webinar that has any sort of further questions regarding the tool specifically, please just chuck any questions in the chat pane, and we can sort of come back to them. But you have some key takeaways for us, I believe, things to focus on.
I do have some key takeaways for us. So, as we've mentioned a couple of times, you have to plan first. So make sure you've drawn it out, you've whiteboarded it, you've planned it however you'd like to plan. Just make sure you have an idea of what you're trying to achieve and how you're going to do it. So my second key takeaway is to create your workflows around your personas. That's where I would say your starting point is. If you have a whole lot more information about your contacts, or that actually you only want to send this content to people who are based in the US, as I mentioned earlier, you can base your workflows around other things. We just find that personas are a nice starting point.
So I suppose it just has to be something that you have the piece of information on, right?
Exactly.
So if it was like industry, it would mean that every one of your contacts or every one of the leads that you generate need to know exactly what industry
So
they're in.
that goes back to the progressive profiling questions. Like if you want to do workflows around industry, make sure that you're asking industry in your forms. I think that it also goes back to your content. Like if you want to, you might want to create workflows for each industry, but your content isn't industry specific, so therefore there's actually no point. You're going to send the same content to everyone anyway. And then key takeaway number 3, ensure that you have persona-specific content to fit each stage of the buyer journey. That'll come out of your content audit, so you'll easily be able to see your gaps, what you'd like to change. Use branching logic to ensure that you're not offering a piece of content to someone who has already downloaded it. That's really important. If I've downloaded your ebook on top tips to make my website load faster, I really don't want to receive an email with you encouraging me to download it again. As I mentioned earlier, test which email type works best for you. So you can do that testing with an if-then branch. You can do that testing by setting up with an HTML email and maybe seeing how it performs and changing it to a different one. So again, that's just part of the making sure you're optimizing your workflow. Personalize your lead nurture emails using tokens. So obviously you now have this contact information, so you can add their first name in there. If you have their job title or the industry, you can say, this is why people in industry, insert industry name, really struggle with this, and here we've got some content to help you. And as we mentioned, use goals to split your contacts out into more appropriate workflows and to track the success of them.
Fab. Thank you, Jess. Just one last question. So we spoke on number 5 here, we said about test which email type works for you. Obviously, say for example, you put the workflow live, people are completing a form, they automatically enroll and are being sent ebooks and other pieces of content to download, etc. over time. How often would you go back into the workflow? When we're looking at the performance metrics, so which email's working best, which isn't performing that well, how often would you be looking at stuff like that?
So that's a very good question.
If you're not busy, of course.
If I'm not busy. I think that you do have to give things time to perform. So I don't think you set up the workflow and in 2 days' time you're like, oh my goodness, let's go and see how everything's performing and do some changing. I would say maybe like once a week, once every 2 weeks, just to have a little look into the tool, see how things are performing, what's happening.
Yeah, so I guess the key is that you set it up, you put it live, but that's not it. You don't have to leave it as that. You can go in, you can edit emails, you can add emails.
You can add steps, you can do all sorts of things. I think just to go back on how often to check it, just remind me of something else. If you've got a huge sample size, like if you're doing this workflow to your persona business owner Barry, and actually in your database you have 5,000 business owner Barrys, you'll be able to see how this is performing a lot quicker than if you were sending it to Marketing Mary and you only had 25 Marketing Marys. So it does depend on the size of the audience that you're sending to, but I would give it some time before you go and change things.
Cool. Thank you, Jess. So guys, just to finish up, we have some HubSpot training taking place in our London office over the next couple of months. As ever, if there's any questions or queries around those training sessions, be it the agendas or more information or pricing, please just drop me an email and